This week on Mountaineer Gameday Extra, can West Virginia start off the month of November with a win? We're breaking down the upcoming matchup versus Texas Tech.
And we'll dive into college hoops. The regular season starts for both WVU men's and women's basketball this week. That's coming up in Ask MGD Extra.
Angelica Trinone and Nick Farrell here with you as always on a brand new episode of Mountaineer Gameday Extra. WVU coming off a heartbreaking 3-point loss at Baylor on Halloween night. And Nick, this one especially hurt since it was right there in the grasp for WVU. While the offense once again seemed to struggle, a lot of positive takeaways that can come from the defense and, of course, the special teams performance. We'll get into a little bit more of what we saw from Baylor and also Texas Tech. But what we got to start with is an injury update and also a roster update. It was announced at his press conference on Tuesday. Head coach Neil Brown had said that junior quarterback Jack Allison has decided to enter the transfer portal. Same thing for West Virginia receiver Ricky Johns. But whenever you look at the injury list, we had to bring some papers. So many guys questionable, things up in the air for this Texas Tech matchup.
Yeah, you're right, Angelica. This injury list just keeps on growing and growing for WVU. There is one guy who is slated to return to the lineup this week. It's tight end Giovanni Haskins. But beyond that, a lot of guys in doubt or in question for this week. So let's take a look at the injury list. Like I said, pretty lengthy injury list here for WVU. Doubtful this week is wide receiver TJ Simmons. He was knocked out of the game at Baylor. Then there's quite a few guys that are questionable as well. One of them running back Kennedy McCoy. Another is Josh Chandler. Remember, the linebacker was knocked out of the Oklahoma game, did not play against Baylor. He could return against Texas Tech. He may not. We'll have to keep a close eye on that. Also, safety Noah Guzman, who played a fantastic game against Baylor. He's questionable this week, as is kicker Evan Staley, who, of course, did not play against the Bears and was replaced by Casey Legg. Then there's a couple of guys who are out. Sean Ryan, the wide receiver and Temple transfer, has missed the last couple of games for WVU. Optimism that he's getting close to being back. Quandarius Qualls, on the other hand, is done for the season. The defensive lineman had season-ending surgery and will now miss the final 4 games of the year for WVU. So a long injury list, a lot of impact players on that list who are either in question or out. But really, Angelica, one thing that is kind of perplexing for WVU now is the Jack Allison situation. It comes somewhat out of the blue. Allison was in a quarterback battle with Austin Kendall, obviously did not win it during the offseason, and has backed up and seen a little bit of time this season, particularly in that Iowa State game. But now the question is, who is going to be West Virginia's backup quarterback? And as Coach Brown told us earlier this week, it's kind of an open competition right now in practices for WVU. It's either going to be redshirt freshman Trey Lowe, who has seen just a little bit of time this year, or it's going to be transfer quarterback Jarrett Deggy, the guy who set a ton of freshman records at Bowling Green, a 2-year starter there. A lot of promise and upside with that player. He's going to redshirt this season. The question is, will we see him a handful of times here under that new redshirt rule for WVU? Quarterbacks coach Sean Reagan said last week that Deggy could move into the backup role for WVU. We get a little bit more clarity on that situation now that Allison is entering the transfer portal. So it'll be interesting to see who moves up in the depth chart and if we see either of those guys to back up Kendall, to get on the field, I should say, in Kendall's relief at some point down the stretch.
Yeah, I believe last week Coach Reagan had said on the Neil Brown radio show that ideally what you want to use Deggy for is the last 3 games of the season and potentially a bowl game. I know after the way things have been going the past couple games, you sit here thinking, why are we talking bowl eligibility with this team? But it's still there. Right. It's still in grasp for the Mountaineers. Still some games that are winnable here down the stretch, and we'll start with this Texas Tech game. We talk about the injuries on the side for West Virginia, but the Red Raiders are dealing with their fair share of injuries too. And when you look at these teams, Nick, both 1-4 in Big 12 play, only have 3 wins on the season. Both welcome a new head coach, both dealing with injuries, both looking for a way to end the season strong. These two teams, there are so many similarities going up in between these two. They're missing a lot of key players as well, but whenever you look at that list for West Virginia, TJ Simmons was really the one guy who started to be coming on offensively for the Mountaineers. We could say the same thing about Sean Ryan before he got hurt. And last week, at Baylor. That's really the reason that West Virginia wasn't able to come away with the win in Waco. We saw Winston Wright pop off that kick return. He's going to be now in that role for West Virginia. And then defensively, we saw one of the best performances collectively of the season, especially from Darius Stills and Dante Stills as well. But on the flip side, Texas Tech has a pretty stout defense as well. We'll get into that a little bit later in the program. I actually had a chance to talk to somebody who covers Texas Tech to talk about these two players that this defense revolves around. So we'll save that for a little bit here later on. But talking quarterbacks, Jet Duffy, a guy that I think Keith Washington remembers pretty well from being there in Lubbock last season, a guy that kind of in the same situation as West Virginia, got thrown into the fire here. Their starter was hurt, but still, nonetheless of the injuries and other people plugging in, still a game that West Virginia needs to bring its all, and really needs to come away with the win. And don't discount Texas Tech. Upset number 21 Oklahoma State when they were ranked there at the time, and I believe played Baylor to 2-3 overtimes in that matchup.
Right, 2 overtimes.
Going to be a pretty hefty matchup coming up at Milan Pushkar Stadium.
Yeah, Jet Duffy is a player that WVU fans will probably remember from last season. The Mountaineers in Lubbock come up with a huge lead early on in that game. Jet Duffy comes in late and almost leads the Red Raiders to mount a massive comeback early in Big 12 play last year for WVU. It took a Keith Washington pick six off Duffy late in the fourth quarter to seal that victory for WVU. It did get a little bit dicey there, though, but you have to like Angelica, West Virginia's chances in this matchup based on the defensive performance that it put forth last week. 8 sacks last week, 7 on Charlie Brewer, another on a strip sack on a trick play that Tyke Smith completely blew up. And what a season he's having. A young guy that's had to come in and play a ton of football in some really high-pressure situations that has just proven that, much like Keith Washington, he can be a huge playmaker for WVU in the secondary. Had a pick six against Iowa State that made things interesting early on in that game. Forced a fumble, on early in the first half against Baylor, too. So that's 2 huge takeaways in West Virginia's last 3 games coming from a true freshman. We've said so many times that West Virginia's path to victory in just about any game this season is going to revolve around takeaways, and Smith has been the guy for WVU to generate those big plays lately. But you also surely won't forget the big game that Darius and Dante Stills had up front for WVU. Reese Donahue as well, and Reuben Jones, both of those 2 guys are playing extremely well. But wow, Dante and Darius Stills have been absolutely exceptional. Darius Stills had 3 sacks in that game. He's now number 2 in the Big 12 in both sacks per game and tackles for loss per game. He's a guy that this season said he wants to prove himself as a junior, says he feels that he's been overlooked as an underdog. He's got a really talented younger brother that lines up next to him, and he certainly has proven himself over the last few weeks, especially in that Baylor game. And what the guys on defense have told us, Angelica, after the game, is that now it's all about finding consistency on that side of the ball, taking that great performance against Baylor and ballooning it into something bigger.
Yeah, talking to those guys on the defensive side, they had said that game really set the standard, but that's where they wanted to be a little bit earlier in the season. But the thing is, when you look, most of these injuries have come on the defensive side for West Virginia. And not only that, you've asked even so many young players to step in, but so many other guys, including the young guys, to play a position that they didn't start the season. And we've seen so much shuffling going around, especially there in the secondary. So whenever you look at what this team was able to do last week up against Baylor, hopefully you can see that same West Virginia team, not only against Texas Tech, but see this defense just continue to improve. And like head coach Neil Brown had said earlier this week at his press conference, this team is not doom and gloom. There's still plenty of games left to play, and it's all about finishing the season strong.
This game, first game in November, and I think all teams are judged and kind of remembered for how they finish. So this is our opportunity. We're coming back home. There's a lot going on this week. We got Mountaineer Week on campus. It's true blue for all our fans, so hopefully everybody that's coming out will wear blue.
You can hear much more from the head coach on West Virginia's upcoming opponent, Texas Tech, coming up this weekend on a brand new episode of The Neil Brown Show. Make sure to check your local listings. And right now we are going to continue to hear a little bit more about TTU. We've got David Collier from Red Raider Nation joining us now for a more in-depth look. And David, where I want to start is the quarterback. If you look at Alan Bowman, he's a guy who started the season for the Red Raiders, has been out with a shoulder injury. One of their backups is also hurt, so that leaves Jet Duffy really being the only option that they have. He has started every game in Big 12 conference play. Going back to that game last year in Lubbock, 2 picks, 1 taken to the house by Keith Washington for Duffy. What have you seen in his improvement from that game last year versus the Mountaineers to where he is now?
He's a much better passer, and the one thing you probably will see different this time around is he hasn't run the football as much as he has in years past, like he did against West Virginia. And I think that's more of a product of just the lack of depth behind him. Jackson Tyner is the backup right now. Alan Bowman and Maverick McIver are 2 guys that are battling back from injury, so there's not much behind him, so they've kind of told him to pump the brakes on running as much, which might be helpful for West Virginia's defense come Saturday.
Sticking offensively, David, a pretty solid unit up front. Tech is top 10 in the nation in sacks allowed. What have you seen from the guys up front? What challenges does the offensive line present this weekend?
Well, I will say this. They did have some struggles early on. They too, were dealing with injuries. This team has battled injuries like I know most in college football have throughout the year, but it just seems like they've been bitten by the injury bug quite a bit on that offensive line as well. But the one key for them, and probably that kind of makes the stat look a little better than it might be, is the fact that they get the ball out so fast. There's a lot of sideline-to-sideline passing going on, and trying to let the wide receivers block downfield to spring a guy, so they don't have to block as long, essentially. So that might skew that sack number just a little bit in favor of the Red Raiders.
David Collier from Red Raider Nation joining us now with more on Texas Tech. And David, switching to the other side of the ball defensively, Jordan Brooks and Douglas Coleman are among the top in the nation in defenders. Whenever you look at Brooks, he's top 10 in sacks, tackles for loss, and solo stops per game. And then on the other side, Coleman, he leads the FBS in interceptions. So I think safe to say that this Tech defense really does revolve around that duo.
Yeah, Coleman, he switched to safety this season, and he's been huge back there in the secondary. Unfortunately for him, the last thing that people will remember him from is receiving that blocked field goal against Kansas a couple weeks ago, and then pitching it backwards, and it was recovered by Kansas, which led to the game-winning field goal there in Lawrence. But he's been huge in the secondary, which has just been, again, an injury-filled secondary. A lot of youth back there, so if West Virginia is able to get the ball down the field, they should be able to exploit that secondary. But when it comes to Brooks, one of the best players in the country, he's on the finalist for the Butkus Award, only 2 guys from the Big 12 on that list. The defense revolves around him. He's going to wreak havoc when it comes to stopping the run, maybe getting the backfield. I think he's one of the top 5 guys in the nation in tackles for loss. So the offensive line is certainly going to have to get on him and make sure he doesn't get in that backfield and cause problems for the passing game for West Virginia.
All right, David, thanks so much. We appreciate the time. We've got much more on this matchup between West Virginia and Texas Tech. Coming up this weekend, Mountaineer Game Day is back at Milan Puskar Stadium. We will be live starting at 10 a.m. and then at 11 a.m. on AT&T Sportsnet. And of course, always make sure to check your local listings.
And as always, a big thanks to our friends over at the Varsity Club Catering Services for MGD Xtra, provided by the Varsity Club Sports Tavern of Morgantown. So let's get back to it. Sam Caniglio's here. He's got questions for us this week. Sam, what's on your mind?
Well, you guys already kind of discussed it earlier with Jack Allison is entering himself into the transfer portal. That has a little bit of an impact on WVU. What do you guys think that's going to do to their quarterback position?
Right, so as we discussed a moment ago, the big question is, what does it do for West Virginia's depth chart, right? Allison was the backup quarterback. Who's going to step into that role? And to reiterate, Coach Brown mentioned that there's an open competition in practices this week between redshirt freshman Trey Lowe and junior transfer Jared Dagey. Now, we've had some indications throughout the season that we've already seen Lowe in the lineup a couple of times this season. Against Missouri, he played late in the game. Against Oklahoma, he played sparingly as well. Sometimes they've gone to packages for Lowe to give a different look for WVU. He's a mobile quarterback, as we all know, but also to get him some experience as well. He's seen a very limited amount of time in his Mountaineer career. Dagey, on the other hand, though, is kind of a perplexing situation because We know that he's going to redshirt this year. He had an injury earlier in the offseason that Coach Brown said kind of limited his progression to get up to speed for this season after transferring. But now, with only 4 games remaining, it makes sense for WVU to give him a little bit of action here because at the very least, it's some experience, new playbook for Deggy, show what he's made of, show what he's capable of, and get some experience here before the end of that redshirt year. He's going to have 2 more years of eligibility. He was a sensational quarterback at Bowling Green, and we could be looking between Lowe or Deggy potentially at the future of the quarterback position for WVU. Just one more thing, just to reiterate something about Allison too. I don't think we touched on this. The story of Jack Allison, he redshirted at Miami, transferred to WVU, sat out a year, and then is now a redshirt junior. The deal with Allison is he's going to graduate in December and have a degree, so he's going to be a graduate transfer if he does go somewhere else to play out his final year of eligibility. I know there were some folks on Facebook who were asking, how can Allison do this? That's the reason, that the NCAA has way fewer restrictions on guys who get a degree. If they want to go somewhere else, they have way fewer restrictions. And so that's the path that Allison likely takes if he does leave WVU.
I'll be interested to see what happens with Jack. Unfortunately, things really probably didn't go the way that he would have thought here in any of this time at West Virginia last year, backing up Will Greer. I think the one game that he can really look at, on his resume here is that Baylor game last year whenever he went in through the touchdown pass to, I believe it was Giovanni Haskins at that point. Might have been Dominique Maiden, I'm not entirely sure. But that game, and then, of course, this year, one of the first outings that we saw from him was the pick 6 at Missouri. He had an interception against Iowa State. And you could just tell that offensively, things weren't really the same with him in there as they were with Austin Kendall. And I know after the performance, especially last week, so many people are, why isn't Trey Lowe in? Why haven't we burned Jarret Doege's red shirt? There were even some people saying, where's Jack Allison? He should get his chance in here as well. As far as the quarterbacks are concerned, I'm not entirely sure that where this West Virginia team is at this point, is a quarterback change going to make that much of a difference? Sure, Austin Kendall has not had a perfect performance. He's not played his best at times, but if we're going to talk about Austin Kendall, we've got to talk about all the other problems West Virginia seems to be having offensively. Can't get much going in the pass game. While some of that is on Kendall, I believe Coach Brown had said, 5 or 6 drops that could have been some crucial plays for WVU in that game up against Baylor. And that's not the first time that we saw that. We saw that, I believe, in the Texas game as well. Some guys who were seeming to be the reliable targets of TJ Simmons, as Sam James. Some passes there right to him seem to just fall to the turf. So offensive line obviously can't get anything happening in the run game as well. And anytime you look back there, what Austin Kendall doesn't have a lot of time to throw in, and sometimes we see him get forced into such bad decisions. So I think where West Virginia is at this point in the season, I'll be interested to see if a Trey Lowe gets in, if a Jarret Doege gets in, how much of a difference it makes, because I think while it all does start with Austin Kendall, I think offensively, this WVU team has a lot of improving to do all around the board. Like to see how they kind of come up with an answer to last week's performance. This week up against Texas Tech, not one to sit here and point fingers, but if you're looking at it, special teams did its job against Baylor. Defense did its job against Baylor. Unfortunately, the offense just couldn't follow suit.
It'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. But, coming into the end of the week, though, we've got some hoops going on. Last Friday, the Mountaineers got their first unofficial win in the exhibition game, 78-70 over Duquesne. Angelica, you were there. What were you taking away from that game?
Well, first, they almost, I thought for a second, might not come away with the 78-70 win. This team started off, Oscar Shibwe, of course, a guy we've all been excited about this year. 17 points, 14 rebounds, really led this team. But they started out on such a tear. I think it was like a 12-2 run that they were up early. We saw some guys like, Emmett Matthews had to dunk, Derek Culver had to dunk. But it seemed like something we have seen with these West Virginia teams in years past. You hit right there close to the half, a little bit into the second half. Things kind of seem to drop off. They kind of make mistakes. I think 14 turnovers allowed 23 points to Duquesne off of those turnovers. Talking to some of the guys after the game, Derek Culver had said, you have to think this is the first time he and Oscar have really been on the floor at the same time. They've been practicing against each other they're leading up to this game. But also, too, a lot of new guys really thrown in there. We saw some different lineups. You have to think that some of that was just due to miscommunication. And the one thing that Coach Huggins said, he thought that the young guys played better than the veterans did. I think that is a good sign because a lot of these young guys are going to be relied on this season. But, I mean, we saw like that huge dunk from Jalen Bridges. We know he's going to redshirt this year. So while, they did come away with the win, certainly a lot of things that this WVU team has to work on. But if we know anything about Hugs, he'll have them ready to go this Friday against Akron.
Yeah, you're right, Angelica. So the thing for me, we've been really high on this WVU Hoops team in the recent weeks because there's so much talent on this team, particularly with the addition of Shibwe, who's the Big 12's preseason freshman of the year. But there are going to be some growing pains with this team. And West Virginia's non-conference schedule isn't necessarily easy, right? There's going to be a game against Ohio State toward the end of that slate in Cleveland that's going to be a big-time matchup. Pitt coming up in just a couple of weeks. I mean, Pitt is a team that has gotten better and better. I know a lot of WVU fans are watching this and saying, what are you talking about? But really, under Jeff Capel, Pitt is starting to maybe reemerge as the Pitt of old. So that game is, I believe, West Virginia's second regular season game. And I think I'm blanking here, but there might be also one more pretty big non-conference game on the slate that I'm overlooking. But, West Virginia is going to have some real challenges early on. And, of course, it's not going to get any easier when Big 12 play begins. So if WVU does have some hiccups early on, games that, hey, it's going to win big, and then all of a sudden it's only an 8-point victory and things get a little dicey at the end, that might happen with this team, but if it happens during non-conference play, that's better than it happening in critical must-win games in Big 12 play. Remember, as we've said before, the goal for this team is probably to make it to the NCAA tournament and compete and really be in the mix in the Big 12. Had a great run in the Big 12 tournament last year, knocked off a couple of teams and beat the team that played for the national championship in Texas Tech. How did it get there? West Virginia went through a ton of growing pains last year and went through a really rocky non-conference slate as well with some just brutal losses early in the season and really throughout the season. But again, those players who are back this year, they learned those tough lessons. They've gone through it before. It may be tough for a little bit here this season, but if WVU, if there's a lot of growth, if that's evident throughout this season, that's a really good thing for the Mountaineers.
We talk about Oscar, but I think two guys aside from Oscar that I'm anxious to see, Taz Sherman and Sean McNeil. What we didn't know, well, at least I didn't know until post-game, that apparently, I think right after the team got back from Spain, he came down with a pretty bad illness and was out for, what did Hug say, almost kind of like close to a month and ended up getting a concussion. So he's somebody who hasn't got to practice a lot with this team. Talking to him after the game, he had said conditioning-wise, I can definitely feel like I have not really had a lot of time to practice, but he was out there popping off some threes. I thought that defensively he played really well. Taz Sherman, too, some really nice shots from him. But in the first half, I think there might have been 3 turnovers that, maybe pressed Virginia's back. Saw it a little bit there. In that game, I was impressed with it a little bit. I'm not going to get carried away, but I'm just going to say that I'm really liking what I see from this year's team. And I feel with the guys like the Emmett Matthews, the Jordan McCabe that were already here, I feel like this team is already on track to kind of have more improvement, than they did last year with just all the number of key players.
I'd have to agree with you. And it all starts with that win last Friday. Emmett Matthews said, going back a year, they had an exhibition against Penn State.
This is a good point. They lost.
And they took a loss.
Right.
And he said, it happened to be his birthday on Friday. He said that was the only thing he wanted for his birthday. So not a bad birthday present for him. But it would be a really good birthday present for us if you followed us on Twitter.
That's a segue.
And liked
Sam.
us on Facebook. Everything is at WV Illustrated, West Virginia Illustrated on Facebook. Send in your questions. Hashtag AskMGDExtra. We'll have them on the show next week if you so choose. If you will gift us with your questions.
Well, Sam, thanks, man. This is a really exciting week because we're right in that time when basketball overlaps with fall sports. We've got a women's hoops season opener on Thursday, men's hoops against Akron on Friday, home football game, and then I believe another women's hoops game on Sunday.
Men's soccer close out the regular season on Thursday. Of course, Sam talks about our social media. We'll be at just about every single one of those games, if not all of them, so make sure to stick with us on social media. We'll have you covered, especially on these games from the Coliseum, see if West Virginia can start off with a win.
Yep, definitely.
Let's check in now with Dale Wolfley for his weekly.
It's your MGD Extra, and the Wolves. Let me hear it. Come on now, baby. That's right. How? Here we go. We're going to go ahead and go look at senior Reese Donahue. Reese is playing lights out this whole month of October. You've heard Coach Brown say numerous times that Reese Donahue is playing the best football of his career, and it's just in time. Let's take a look at Reese right here as he is impressive. He's had a couple sacks in each of the last 2 games. Right there. Good job coming off the ball. This is what Reese does. He doesn't give up. He does not give up. This is what I like about this young man and his hustle. He's such a leader on the field. Let's take a look at the next play. So now you're going to see Reese up here. He's going to come inside and attack. This is the difference between the last few years that Reese was doing that 3-3 stack where he had to support the offensive line, hold him up so that the linebackers and safeties can make tackles. Well, now with this defense, he becomes an attacker, and it probably took a little bit of time of adjustment, but Reese is really on top of it right now. Roll it. You gonna see this right here? Nice job of coming inside. And what happens? You got to finish the play once you get inside of the offensive lineman. And that's exactly what Reese does. This is excellent here. Let's take a look here at the end zones. He gets the big TFL. So once again, you see Reese right here. Now, usually, he'd be trying to hold up these offensive linemen, like I said, once again, so that the backers here can come in and make the plays. But now, with this new defense, Reese can go ahead and just attack the A-gap right here. Roll it. Look at that. Oh, guard. Bad step right there, Mr. Guard. Coming in. TFL. Oh. Then the defense swarms. That's a great job by Reese. Keep it up, brother. You got 4 more games minimum left in this season. Let's keep going and try to get into the bowl season. You would love to go bowl partying. I know that. I know Reese sure would. And that is your MGD Extra, the Wolves. Oh yeah! Boom!
That about does it for us this week on Mountaineer Game Day Extra, but a reminder that you can stick with our coverage all the way up until the matchup with Texas Tech and well beyond that if you download the WV Illustrated app. That's where you'll find web stories, video interviews, and much, much more. You can also follow us on Facebook at West Virginia Illustrated and on Twitter at WV Illustrated.
WVU or Texas Tech, which team is going to climb out of the Big 12 basement? We will figure that out this weekend. Kickoff is set for noon at Milan Puskar Stadium, and we will have you covered right up to that noon kick on Mountaineer Game Day, so make sure to join us. Thanks again for being with us right here on Mountaineer Game Day Extra. We'll see you next week.